entrench and become a natural part of everybody's lives. But I don't think it's going to put extra demands on creating products or the like that we don't already have.
I was going to say, lately there's so much gloom and doom, especially here in the Valley. The internet's over, or not over, but the best years are behind it, so to speak. I mean, when you look at that number, it's breathtaking to imagine the number of new businesses, the new opportunities that are going to come. Do you really think that number can be reached, in the next 7 to 8 years?
It might be aggressive, maybe it'll only be 2 billion. But 2 billion is not bad. What we experienced over the last 10 years was a gold rush. And
if you think of 3 billion is like everyone.
Well, it's actually, it's not. It's less than half the world by that time.
Okay, but you got a ton of people who are just simply too young to do anything. And you got a bunch of guys that are beyond the point of wanting to do anything. So you don't have to worry about the middle. And if you get 3 billion out of the middle, you really have done it.
Well, except that we've got such lengthened lifespans where
right.
people function much longer than they did. So that middle is pretty large.
Especially with 401ks.
Right.
So would you consider accessing the internet via your cell phone as part of your home?
I'm sorry?
Would you consider the accessing the internet through your cell phone as part of your home?
Oh, so accessing the internet through cell phone, would I count that? Oh, absolutely. What the heck? I'll give you another anecdote. I want to say Kobe. Yeah, Kobe about 2 years ago. In this very interesting little restaurant, we got friendly with the people who ran it and decided that we wanted to be able to send them email, because I took some pictures and I wanted to send it to them. The only email they had was their daughter's Docomo cell phone. And they never actually answered me. It turns out there's actually now a substantial fraction of the internet that is really only cell phone based. And it's completely viable. I mean, for me, the trio actually is the critical mass capability, where things integrate well enough, and never mind the bandwidth sucks right now, that'll get better. But the capability of that device and the size of it strikes me as really being quite good, much as the Palm was a breakthrough PDA device. And I hope folks remember that the Palm was a breakthrough after 10 years of failed efforts. There were huge numbers of efforts almost 10 years earlier to do great PDA kinds of things. And so, like with most breakthroughs, there's actually some pretty interesting history. Yeah.
What about the impact of Wi-Fi on internet access, especially if the plan of providing universal Wi-Fi access comes true?
Right.
Every man and his dog can access it.
Right. So what's the effect of the wireless access, in particular higher speed Wi-Fi 802.11 star? It's great stuff. It doesn't work too well in a moving car, and that's not a trivial point. I mean, what we seem to have as reality is that there's a spectrum of ways of accessing the net. Or maybe I should phrase that as, there's a range of communication technologies, and if you hook them all together right, and you have enough of them available to the user as a mix, then they could probably keep in contact where the only experience they would suffer is differential throughput. Now, it's worth noting that today, if you have a TCP connection and you move, and that move is not transparent to the internet technology. So if the move is handled by the lower layers, then it all looks like you've got the same IP address the whole time. Then your TCP connection is maintained. But if you actually have to make a transition that is seen by the IP layer, you lose your TCP connection. Now, it may be easy to plug back in and get reconfigured. DHCP, as Bill was mentioning, is really good for that. But if you are doing something that needs serious continuity of communication, the current capabilities don't allow you to do that. It turns out, very oddly in my view, That kind of mobility that you would need to support is really quite similar to supporting good multi-homing, because it reduces down to having multiple IP addresses at the same time. And you can't do that with TCP, and you can't do that with IP version 4. There is a claim that SCTP, which is a new protocol at the TCP and UDP level, will allow that, and that it's intended for reliable datagram service. We'll see. A few years ago, a couple different people had an idea for making it actually pretty easy to do that kind of mobility, and it didn't catch on. No one in the technical community seemed interested in it. So we clearly have an explosion happening with hotspots. I went into Tide House, downtown San Jose, a few weeks ago, had about an hour to kill, walked up to the bar, sat down, and asked the bartender whether they had wireless access. And he actually looked insulted. Of course they did. And it worked, and it was, and the problem was, let's see, if I remember that place, the carrier that they used was some weird service. And so there'll be, as there have been for every other service that starts on the net, there's a shakeout with some flaky guys that start up and don't do a very good job, and then some others that aren't flaky and do a good job. It certainly looks like T-Mobile is being very aggressive, and oddly enough, the traveler's version of the Internet Cafe in the U.S. appears to be Starbucks. I've been relying on that in the last few weeks quite a lot, and saved my hide, because at one point I was staying in a hotel that had advertised internet access, but what they meant was dial-up. Colored me very irritated with that hotel. On the other hand, the Grand Hyatt downtown San Francisco, just for the heck of it, I was again killing time. They had wireless running, the page, and they had an intercept, and the page that started said either dial extension 56 to get authorized, and there was no phone anywhere inside, I was in the lobby, or click here. Presumably click here would take you to one of these standard login things. Well, click here took me back to the same page. So we're in that startup transit. So I think that the concept of the hotspot is probably totally safe for sitting down and doing some work. If you want the drive-by data exchange that you hear people talk about sometime, it's not clear what's going to do that. And there are discussions about having natural trade-offs between 3G or equivalent metropolitan area networking and Wi-Fi when you're local. And my guess is that's actually kind of the right model, is your device will have some number of ways of connecting, and they will have differential performance. And they'll get better or worse depending on which direction you're traveling. It doesn't look like there'll be any single killer technology there. Having said all that, in case you hadn't noticed, I don't do hardware very much. And so this is just my sense from standing back and watching what's going on, and basically being a user that really wants this stuff to be working today. Okay. So, what actually has the internet been used for? What's been the development of capabilities on the net? And this, frankly, for all that this has been going on with the first bit, this is where I think things are interesting. The next one is going to be interesting and difficult. We had a burst of capabilities in the earliest days of the ARPANET. The ARPANET was first demonstrated in the fall of 1972. By 1973, all the applications were running. Email, file transfer, terminal access through Telnet. Most of them were demonstrated in the fall of 72. I'm going to ask a trick question. I'm telling you it's a trick question so you don't give the obvious answer. When was the web invented? One guess at 94.
86.
One at 86. Bill says 89. Berners-Lee did his work in 89, but as I said, this was a trick question. 1965.
Oh, no. We're not going to count
Yes.
Ted Nelson.
No. And we're building a guy named Ted Nelson who created the term hyperlink, and he was at Brown on the East Coast. And were that the only thing going on in 65? Then no, I wouldn't count that. But you'll see a little thing on the left there that says NLS. SRI had a research project called the Augmentation Research Center, started by the principal investigator was a guy named Doug Engelbart. Now, many people think the mouse was invented at Park. It wasn't. It was invented by this group. And that's a big deal, but that's actually not enough to claim, well, that was the web, of course. The system that they had running in the latter part of the 60s, and I was using it in the fall of 72, and it was basically version 2 or 3 of their system, was a shared environment for text exchange. It didn't do graphics. The Park people added that. And that was only about 3 years ago, about 75. It had dynamic links, textual links, that you could type and click on, and it would take you over to another document. It was not network-based in the sense that the documents were all in a single repository. But from the standpoint of the technology that they had, it was actually a trivial update. Now, the project died down, got bought by Timeshare, and then essentially went away. They tried to market it, but it was a little difficult to use. It took about 3 months to get competent at using that system. So the levels of usability have gotten just a tad better. But I think that if you ever have a chance to look at descriptions of that system, you will see the core of what the web is really about. And by and large, in fact, Berners-Lee did not invent anything other than the whole system. Every idea in the web was extremely well established, had been around in various forms for a long time. What hadn't existed was the integration of them in a way that balanced utility with ease. And that was where his real cleverness came to bear. And it turns out that if you look at Unix, going back to 69, Unix is generally characterized as not having invented any computer science constructs. And it turns out the setuid bit is sort of the only possible exception. Everything else was taking well-established constructs and getting the right engineering mix. And I mention these two examples because I think there's a lesson to learn there as we try to do things in the future. We have a tendency right now in the Internet standards arena that people are trying to build big systems. Well, that's what the OSI people did. And big systems are not only big when you built them, they take a long time and they're big when you design them and when you write specs. And all of that ends up meaning you miss the market opportunity. And somebody comes along with a little system that does a little bit, but quickly. Early 80s we had, and I mentioned email even though it was earlier, because at least now we got our own protocol. Email in the earliest days was a special couple of commands in the file transfer capability. And the main deficiency with that, the only real problem with that, was you could only do one addressee per copy of the message. And that doesn't scale very well. So with SMTP, we now can have multiple addressees. And it occurs to me I left off a fairly important item up around the early 90s that I'll mention as we go on. The DNS, how many people know why the DNS was invented? You don't count. Yeah?
Was it for naming?
Okay, that's right. The DNS takes a domain name and maps it to an IP address. What did we do before that? I mean, the networking technology was around for 10 years in substantial operation.
That's all right.
Host files.
Host files, hosts.txt, hosts.txt, which is a listing of all the hosts on the ARPANET and then early internet and their address. What was wrong with that? Well, that's a technology that doesn't scale. It's hard to keep up to date and it's centralized. And so the DNS did a change to both of those things. It took the administrative problem and distributed it, and it took the query problem and distributed it.